And so at 19, you moved and up to Tamaki?
I went to Tamaki, yeah. I'd been in the music industry for years. I'd been in the punk scene for years, since I was about 15, 16. And I just wanted to see what else was out there for me. What's going on in the rest of the country. And I'd got offered this opportunity by a friend of mine. She said, if you come up here, I've got a place you can stay. I've got a job for you. I've got transport. And I thought, well, hey, why not?
So the opportunity, I mean, you do talk about this publicly, and it's something that not many people talk about publicly, because there's this, I guess shame that comes with it, or there's this whakama. There's also some trauma that can come with these types of conversations, and some memories that people have that they want to suppress. But you came up here and you started working in the sex industry.
Yeah.
So what was the mahi you were doing at 19 years old?
Yeah, so I remember it was like it was yesterday, really. My friend took me into the this little place on Fort Street and sort of said, well, all you got to do is dance. And I was like, really? She said, yeah. And she took it was a peep show establishment. And I don't even know if they really exist anymore. I think they might have been replaced by the internet or something. But, but it was basically, in a little room. Typically, it's sort of like 3 by 3, maybe a little bit bigger, usually. And often there's a pole in there, just as some sort of prop. And usually some really tacky sort of lights, and you basically there are booths built around the outside of it, and it's dancing. Usually it was for 3 songs was how you measured one show. So people, I say people because wasn't always men that would come in and do it and use the service. Sometimes the women would, but people would come in, pay $15 usually, or $20, get the show, which was 3 songs. And during that time, I'm dancing around and need to have taken all my clothes off by the end of it.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's a little hole. So they're sitting in a booth each, sitting on a chair, and there's a little hole, and they can feed tips into it should they wish to. And then as the dancer, as the one who receives the tips, you decide whether you're going to do anything more elaborate or anything more whatever, for the money, or whether you just finish the show however you see fit. And yeah, so it's like a two-way mirror, so that so
they can see you, but you can't see them.
In theory, the idea is that you can't see them, but I found that my eyes became like, I sort of developed X-ray vision where I could see. But so it was a bit of a play. It was an interesting sort of psychological position to be in, where you've got to behave like you can't see anybody and you're just looking at yourself, but actually you can see them. Yeah.
How did you feel at that time? So, I mean, because how you feel now with years more wisdom and knowing and experience, you'd have possibly a different opinion to that time. How did you feel at that time? Did you think that it was a good idea? Was it good money?
It felt like a means to an end at the time. I had left school at the age of 16, only just fresh 16, so in sixth form. I shifted from an all-girls school, which my mother and my grandmother and my sister and my auntie had gone to, called Avonside Girls. I'd gone from that to Hagley College, which was an adolescent school. So we'd be sitting in the classroom with adults, and it was very creative, and there was no uniform. And, I'd end up drinking at lunchtimes in the Hagley Park across the road. So it was kind of, I'd been going off track for a while. and then I basically just left school, got into drugs, was drinking a lot, was in the punk scene in Littleton. I had 2 dysfunctional relationships, and one after the other, back to back. And so after the second one ended, I was pretty low. I was depressed, and I just was like, what the heck? What is there for me really in this life? And then that was like an opportunity, and but it was also a survival thing, because I genuinely didn't really know how I was going to survive in terms of the basics, food, and and I'd already kind of isolated myself from my whānau mostly anyway, which was easy to do because mum and dad had separated, and mum was very preoccupied with my little brother with cerebral palsy. So I distanced myself anyway, but I think at that time, it was a means to an end. There was a little bit of excitement around it, thinking maybe something really great could come of this. Like I actually thought maybe, because, down on Fort Street back then, there was a lot of lights and action and,
big city.
Yeah. But there was also, I think deep down, there was this knowing that, shit, what am I getting myself into? What really,
Did your whānau know what you were doing?
Yeah, they did. Whether they knew right when they were dropping me off what I was doing, whether I'd actually disclosed to them at that point. But along the way, once I started working, I was so transparent about it that I would tell anyone and everyone, if they asked, or, if they asked, what do you do? I would tell them, or where do you work? I would tell them. And same with because then I ended up coming back down to Christchurch to do it as well for a bit, and same again, to the point where I would stand outside the peep shows, or I'd lean in the doorway and people could see me, on my breaks. I didn't have a problem with it. I
just
wasn't ashamed of it. Yeah.
Did it ever go beyond that? Did you ever get any deeper into the industry where it actually turned into physical contact with clients?
No, there was plenty of opportunity plenty of encouragement but I always drew the line. And there were risky moments where we had private dancers where we were expected to do private shows. If someone came in and wanted one, usually they would pay $40. And what that meant was that they could actually sit in the room and you were doing a one-on-one show with them. And those were times where, it was pretty risky. Even once I started dancing in the strip clubs, it was the same thing. Where it may have been an expectation that you touch or you allow them to touch. But I quickly learned that, that was a more of a thing of actually consent. If no, I don't want you to touch me and I don't want to touch you. So, but there were some pretty touch and go times, but it was always good to know that there was a security. We always had at least one security person around. So, but
because would it have been safe? I mean, I guess that's the other thing, because there is, yes, okay, there's security, but was that industry in your time, was it safe?
Not really, no. It wasn't safe. And, the fact that there were underage girls, and it was common knowledge that we knew that girl was only 14. Oh, when we were working in the strip clubs, everyone knew, everyone who worked there, and it was just like, and if the police came in, we would hide her, stuff like that. I mean, that's unsafe in itself. And then the fact that she was actually just a child, that girl, and men would be propositioning her knowing that she was a child, and stuff like that. So there's unsafety on that way. But then also on the peep shows, if the doorman decided to, and this would often happen, decided, he's just going to duck out and get himself a feed while you're in a private show.
Far out.
And he would shut the door, lock it, and put a sign on it saying back in 5, and you'd sort of have this thing go down with a guy in the room and then be like, oh my God, and you come out and you're locked in there because the doorman's buggered off for a feed. So it wasn't safe really at all.
A lot of people, I'm assuming, definitely myself, have only really experienced these things on TV or in movies. And you kind of see two sides to it. You see one side of it where, the girls are always looked after, and there's kind of like a mama in there who's the mama to all the girls, and the bouncers or the security are really, really well at looking after these girls, and they get, it's like a good lifestyle for them. That's sort of the one side of the movies that you see. And the other side of the movies that you see is the complete opposite, where you're seeing women being abused, and you're seeing women being raped and attacked, and people following them home, and lots of violence and things like that. In Aotearoa, do we have one or the other? Do we have both? What does the situation actually look like? And knowing that you've been out of that space for a little while, so what was it like?
I think it's a fine line. There's a whole lot of fine lines going on, and those lines can be crossed at any stage. And there is a hierarchy system that exists within the New Zealand sex industry, or at least there was back then, and I get the feeling it really wouldn't have changed much. Usually it's the ones who own the clubs who are in the position of power, and often they may, you tend to find that someone who owns a club may also own parlours, and so they have a bit of a monopoly. The ones who had the monopoly, they weren't really very nice people, and these men, and then you might have ones who come along who are newer ones who want to give it a go, and I've seen that happen, and they're usually families. It might be a husband and wife who come in quite naively thinking, oh yeah, and I've seen some terrible things happen to their families as a result. And because it's sort of the underworld, then it means that there's a whole lot of contact with other underworlds, and they all kind of, you've got the drug scene, you've got all that kind of stuff going on as well, and so they all rub shoulders with each other, and because they all exist under that same world. And the whole thing of it was kind of like you were owned in a way. Like I never felt, I was always quite staunch against that. Like, you don't own me, no one owns me. But there was this whole vibe of, oh, she's one of his girls, and then if he came in, because often your boss would drop into the peep show or the club, and there was almost an expectation, oh, you're just going to give him a show for free. Or if he drops in and says, oh, hey, you don't have to work this shift, I'm going to take you out for dinner instead. There was that kind of stuff would go on. Or I'm going to take you for a drive. I had that happen where I felt like I had to go for a drive on one of my shifts with the boss, and then, he got fresh with me, and, it was almost like there was this expectation that he owns you, you work for him, therefore you will, you're at his disposal a little bit. I had heard a lot of horror stories about women getting abused, raped, by the boss or by the staff, male staff. So yeah, I think it's very, very real. Same with massage parlours, the girls getting viewed as being, property and sexual property. Yeah.
During that time of your life, you've already mentioned, and again, it's something that you're not shy to talk about, is your experiences with drugs and alcohol. And you've now been sober for 18 years.
Coming up 18 next month.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
How bad did it get?
It's a funny one, eh? Because again, I always think it's a fine line, because I look at my mates now and I think, yeah, that was me. Really, it was me, but I was just doing it all the time. So it's a difficult one to judge, and especially when you're in it, because when you're in it, your brain's not in your body, eh? You know, you're not really conscious of what you're actually doing. Often it's only in retrospect or through third party that you realise how bad your situation is. But really, it was just drinking every single night, especially working in the clubs, because you would have you could have a couple of drinks free every night. So it sort of encouraged alcoholism. And then you would have people come in. Once you had a couple, you started getting a bit, you know, oh, yeah, I'm all, you know, wouldn't mind some more. And then some guy offers to buy you drinks. Yeah. And so, you know, before you know it, you're intoxicated. The drug side of things, I had dabbled in drugs since I was about 14, was when I first got stoned on marijuana. And then my first boyfriend, his father had an endless supply of hashish and marijuana, so we used to it was just a regular part of our lives. And then from there it was experimenting with things like mushrooms and datura and LSD. But once I became a stripper, so not working in the peep shows, because I was in isolation during that time. That was a very isolated time of my life. But once I started working in the strip clubs, that's when chemical drugs came into play. So things like speed and cocaine. And yeah, so mainly it was speed for me. I got quite hooked on speed and started to believe that that's what I needed to get through my shift and to keep me awake.
And how easily accessible is that?
Oh, it was real easy back then. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the girls had it, and you know, you could either buy it out the back, you know, in our changing room. You could buy it off one of the girls, or one of their mates would come up and you could just pop out and see them. Or they'd just give you a line, you know, you just share lines and stuff like that. So it was pretty much just part of the whole scene, yeah.
And what pulled you out of all of that?
I to this day, I don't really know what it was, but I liken it to a calling. I think it was also the at one point I realised that I was able to identify that what I was doing in the strip clubs was I was thinking that some guy was going to come in like a knight in shining armour on his horse and just sort of gallop on in and go, there she is. But I was like, yeah, it's going to happen. And it never did. And that's when I realised this is never going to happen. Because even these hunky guys who come in, they're still dicks, you know. And they're not like, they might, you know, they're not like, you're the one, I'm in love with you. They're just like, yeah, get her off, baby. So I was like, okay, this isn't happening.
Throwing bills at your feet.
Yeah. But I ended up going down to visit my grandfather, actually. And that's what, the thing that I attribute to what pulled me out was the story he told me about my name. Yeah, and so that story hit home for me, and I likened myself to her. So he told me that my name was Hinerangi, because Nanny Nin's name is Nina Hinerangi. So that's when he said to me, that's your name, Hinerangi. And then he told me about her, and I realised that I was living a parallel to her. It resonated so much for me that I believed that I suddenly found purpose, you know, a purpose, and went, wow, I'm actually named after this woman who did this thing, you know, and that's my journey too, and I want to honour that. So even though I was still in my drug kind of state, it was enough, it hit home enough that when I got back to Auckland after spending some days with my grandfather in Waitomo, first time I'd ever spent time with him like that, it was enough for me to go, yeah, I'm done. It was like a light bulb, you know. I went, wow, And I just quit I quit the jobs, and I got out of there. Yeah.